Today, in Ottawa, thousands of delegates and observers from 176 countries are in the nation's capital. They're going to try to hammer out the text of a UN treaty to curb global plastic waste. This is the fourth in a series of 5 global negotiations, and delegates hope to conclude this later this year in South Korea with a finished treaty. Covering all of it for us in Ottawa is our international climate correspondent, Susan Ormiston. She's live with me this morning. And Susan, great to see you on this. Maybe we talked yesterday about how people were beginning to gather. First full day of discussions. What is going to be happening there at the conference today?
Well, a lot. These are the start negotiations on this really what could be an historic treaty to try to curb plastic pollution across the world. They have a deadline of the end of this year in Korea, as you mentioned. So there's a lot of work to be done to narrow down the list of 70 pages of demands to a refined list of what they're really going after. And they're talking about things like, making recycling work better, about designing products that will be recycled more easily, about banning the worst offenders of single-use plastic. And one of the key sticking points here, though, the red line for some countries, oil-producing countries, is whether this agreement will include efforts to cut plastic production at the source, sometimes called production caps. And you could see this poster here, plastics is poisoning us, cut production now. So there's pressure on these negotiators to include that. We spoke to Canada's Environment and Climate Change Minister Stephen Guilbeault. Sequential talks. Here's what he said.
So the idea is not to say we'll ban the use of plastics, but we have to make sure that we ban those that can't be recycled or that are very harmful, and that those that we continue using, we keep in the economy and out of the environment and out of the human bodies. Just coming out and saying, well, we want to put a cap on plastics. Which plastics? All plastics, including the ones we would use in the medical sector, in the EV sector, in the renewable energy sector. I don't think it makes sense right now.
So that is Canada's Environment and Climate Change Minister Stephen Guilbeault, who's going to be holding an announcement later on today, and we'll be listening in as he makes another announcement further to that plastics registry announced yesterday. Back to Susan, who's live. Susan, we're just seeing over your shoulder, there's that sculpture done by a Canadian artist, kind of speaks to what they're trying to accomplish inside. Tell us about the scene and I guess more what's riding on these negotiations as they try to make history with this treaty.
We're outside the convention center here in Ottawa, and as you mentioned, there's a great flow of plastic from a tap here. You can see all the garbage we're pretty familiar with if you've ever looked in your recycling box lately. And I mean, this is a infinitesimal small indication, art installation of the size of plastic plastic pollution. We are talking about millions of tons going into our oceans, lakes, and rivers every year. And Heather, the predictions are that this kind of is going to triple by 2040. And that's why this conference is so important. The stakes are pretty high. Production of plastic is growing, so is the pollution problem, and the world has agreed to try to get at it, to try to curb it by the end of this year. So this is the 4th of 5th negotiations here in Ottawa. If it's successful, they will carry forward text of an agreement to Korea in November and December and hopefully reach some kind of agreement. But there are many contentious issues. The scope of this, one thing is clear. Everybody here agrees now that recycling is not the way out of what some people called a mess that we've created. It simply can't keep up. So there has to be new rules around design, about what plastics, and of course about whether, in fact, we do try to curb some of the most offensive single-use plastics. So a pretty interesting series of negotiations here. It goes all week. and the real, tension will come over the weekend and into next Monday, Heather.
Susan, really appreciate it. And of course, we look forward to your reporting from there in Ottawa. Our international climate correspondent, Susan Ormiston, with the stakes and the substance of these talks ongoing.